Pico 8 is the way that the creator describes it is it's a fantasy console emulator. So it's like you can still make games for the Nintendo, the original NES, in an emulator, right? You don't even have to have an NES to play them. And so this is like that. It's an emulator for an early 90s console that never existed. And so it has a very retro feel. I'm going to reboot my console here. And hopefully you all heard that sound. And there's a lot of really cool stuff Pico offers. One of those things is a community. If you type Explore, as in that's short for Explore, you can bring up the Explorer and you can see different games. You can search for games. And there are different featured games every different week. And you can get a real good sense of the kinds of stuff you can do in general just by even browsing through some of those games. And I'll show you one or two of those at the end. But we're going to sort of do something from scratch and just figure out how to make our own stuff in Pico 8. One of the cool things, again, we'll mention at the end, is that if you have anyone's game for Pico 8, you have their source code. There's no way to ship a Pico 8 game without it being open source in that sense. So if you see something cool that someone else does, just grab their game, look at their code, look at their map, their sprites, and it's very easy to pull things apart. So I want to start by giving the basic tour. So right now we're at kind of the operating system level, and I can type dir for directory and see what files and folders I have. You guys probably don't have any files or folders yet. And this is, I can make directories and I can copy files. And this is just a folder on my computer. So if I type folder, then in Windows, and you won't see this because I'm not sharing it, but it will pop open the actual Windows folder where those files exist. So you can just copy files around in Windows. You can hand them to people. And Pico 8 project files, which are .p8, again, I'm not sharing right now, but if you open them in a text editor, you'll see that they're just plain text files. So you can easily pass them around to your friends, slap them as attachments to things. All right, so folder is where we're going to have all of our stuff that we're going to be creating. For this, we're just going to start editing and do some stuff. So if you hit escape, you'll go back and forth between the operating system and the editor. And we're going to spend almost all of our time here in the editor. So the editor has 5 parts to it. These are the 5 parts at the top. The first part, the parentheses, is the code editor. And you don't have to use this code editor. I'm going to use it today just because it's kind of cute and it's built into Pico 8. But if the font and the low resness starts pissing you off, you can use Sublime or Visual Studio or something to edit your code externally as well. I recommend actually using the Pico editor at first because there's a couple things you have to do to make sure you're not like saving over your work if you're using an external text editor, but it is very easy to do if this, so if this awful font is the reason you don't like Pico 8, that's not a reason enough not to use it. It's very easy to edit this, not in this editor. So that's the code editor. We're going to go through all of these and we're going to use all of them really quickly. Then we have a sprite editor as well. And we have basic sprite painting tools. We can pick from this lovely 16 color fixed palette. You cannot change the colors. Actually, you can, but you have to like sort of hack the console. So these are the built-in colors. And in general, when you're using the sprite editor, if you hover over with the mouse, like I'm hovering over the orange color here, in the bottom left on the red bar, it'll say what color number that is. So if I ever want to use orange, that's color 9, white is color 7. And it has basic utility like I can right click to pick a color and then left click to paint, right click to pick, control left click to replace. So it can very easily do basic stuff. You can also make bigger sprites. These are 8x8 by default, but you can make 16x16 sprites, 32 or 64 in size. But I'm going to suggest that we stick with 8x8 sprites. It's a little bit weirder if you're using the other ones. And we're going to be creating a couple sprites tonight. And we're going to be using those sprites when we make up our map. So the third tab is the map editor, and we can pick a sprite that we're going to paint and then just paint them on a tile grid in the map editor. And so I'm going to start by making a simple, maybe brick tile. So I'm going to pick something that's maybe gray and then some lines like this for my bricks. I'm totally an artist. There we go. Maybe I need more cracks in my bricks. All right. So then notice that the references to those tiles are live to those sprites. So the sprite that I had painted before is the same sprite in the map. It just looks different now that I changed the pixels. So if I change my mind on the brick color, I can easily go in here and change the sprite, and that's reflected immediately in the map editor. Now the map is larger than what we see here. In fact, if we hold down space, you can pan around and see the grid, and you can use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out. So you can see it's rather large. We're just going to use the top half of the map today. And there's a reason for that. The bottom half has some special weird properties.
So how would you go about clearing out some of these tiles? So if I place tiles I want to delete.
Right. So first of all, there's undo everywhere. So you can just undo. And second, you can right click to pick anything and then paint. And so if I pick this, which is tile 0, and tile 0 is reserved for meaning nothing, then if I control left click on a tile, it will replace all instances of that with the one I have. So in other words, I could right click to pick a non-tile, which is sprite 0, and then I can left click to either paint the non-tile, or I can control left click to replace all tiles. So let me, if I do this, if I control click here, it will replace all of that tile with the new tile that I have selected. So if I pick a nothing tile, I can replace all of these, and I'm back to nothing quickly. Now, I think it only does that for what's in view. So you have to zoom way out if you want to get everything.
Gotcha. Okay.
All right, so that's just the super general idea of there's a map. The map is made of tiles. The tiles are sprites. And so if you look in the bottom left, whenever you're pointing at a part of the map, it shows you the map tile coordinates. And those go from 0, 0 in the top left, and then they're going to go all the way down here to 127.63. So the map is 128 by 64 tall, but we're not using the bottom half of the map. So we're just going to go from, let's see. We're going to go down to 31. So that's going to be the bottom rightmost tile that we're going to use is 127.31. And we'll get back to the map editor here in a little bit when we're actually using it. The fourth editor is the sound effect editor. And it also technically doubles as a music editor, but for now we'll pretend it's just for sound effects. And it's one of the coolest things, I think, in Pico 8. You can literally draw out a shape and then press spacebar, and you get your sound effect. So it's one of the easiest ways to make sound effects. In fact, I use Pico 8 sometimes to make sound effects for other games just because it's so easy. If you want the sound effect to play faster or slower, there's SPD is the speed. You can left click to increase the speed, which really actually is the time, so that makes it slower. So if I make a speed of 2, it'll take twice as long, or 3. And if I play it really slow, like 16, it'll sound like music. And in fact, when I'm painting, if I want to, I can hold down the control button and it will paint only pentatonic scale notes. So music nerds will know that's like just 5 notes in the music scale that sound nice together. And so then it sounds much more like sort of something a little more musical. But usually we're just using this to make sound effects, so I'm going to crank the speed to be very fast again. There are different waveforms you can use, so this square tone has a harsher feel, or these sort of wave, sine wave type thing has a smoother feel. There's also a raw noise, white noise, if you want something to be scratchy, and so you might use that for damage sometimes. You also have volume control down here if you want to have the volume change. And if you want to kill notes, you just bring their volume back to 0. So this would be painting with the noise instrument, and I'm going to have it be a high pitch and then low and then be very fast. So that's just going to be sort of a hit sound. So there's a lot of different cool things you can do with the sound effect editor. If I use this number here, then I'm going to switch which sound effect I'm editing. And so I'm going to go to sound effect 1. Note that it defaults to being slow. So it's going to be sound musical like. I'm going to make it faster again. And I'll just say that's when you eat an apple or something like that. So we can have, I think, 64 different sounds. I don't remember. By just going through like this. And lastly, we have the music editor, which you may have seen me playing with ahead of time. We have different music patterns. This is modeled after the sort of Amiga era mod tracker types of stuff. So we have different sound patterns, and we can pick one that's empty. I don't know if you noticed that pattern 0 and pattern 1 already have stuff in them. That's because they are the same as those sound effects. So sound effects are actually the same as musical patterns, and you can compose them either way, which can be a little weird. But I want to make a brand new one, so I'm going to pick sound effect 2, and you can play it, play notes into it like you play on a keyboard. So Z is the beginning of one scale, Z is C, and then like a piano, it's Z, X, C, V, B going on your keyboard. So you could just play all the way up through M, and then you can continue that with the next octave, starting with the key, or the Q key on your keyboard with QWERTY. So that's how you give octaves and notes. And there are black notes where you would expect them to be on the keyboard. So I'm going to really quickly erase this. And there are lots of different instruments and effects. You can have portamento, you can have reverb and arpeggiation and stuff. But for now, we're just keeping it simple. So let's do the Top Gun theme, for example. And now I hit spacebar to play it. And if I want to play something else with that, I can have up to 4 different tracks playing at once. And those you can use the noise to be like drum sounds for snare drum or bass, or a variety of different music notes, obviously. So let's see. I'll do... So it's pretty easy to make music. And one of the cool things is when you're making music, you're actually making these patterns 0, 1, and 2. And then you can, it's pretty powerful. You can say, play pattern 0 4 times and then skip to pattern 1, 2, 3, and then go back to pattern 0. And so you can actually lay out pretty elaborate songs. And there are some people who have really gotten into the music for Pico 8. It's a really nice little editor once you get used to it. And so it's very easy to make some really impressive sounding stuff. And I'll give you an example of that at the very end. So those are our 5 editors. We have Code, Sprites, Map Editor. Let me get the Map Editor back zoomed in. The Sound Effects Editor and the Music Editor. And again, on the Sound Effects Editor, you can see that those sound effects I made are still there, but the Top Gun theme is here now too. So a sound effect is a music block in that sense. There are a lot of things like that in Pico 8 that have a retro kind of old school console feel that are really cool once you get to know what they are, but they're a little bit weird at first. So before I dive into anything, let's take some questions on that stuff. Yeah.
So for the music editor, is there like some key on the keyboard that like lets you like skip over a spot, or
you can go up and down with the arrow keys.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
So when you were playing that, you were just hitting down between notes?
Right. I was using down as like a rest. Down arrow is like a rest.
You did that real fast.
Yeah, that's fine. So yeah, I was going like Q, down arrow, Q, T, down arrow, T, down arrow, R, E, W, E, R, down arrow, etc. But I used to be big into the mod scene, so those are the same hotkeys they had on the Amiga, so I'm used to it. Anything else related to the basic, what do we have here before we get started trying to actually make some stuff?
This is maybe jumping ahead a little bit, but I press Control S instinctively, and then I get a little notification, no file name not saved.
Right.
How can I do that to make sure I don't lose progress?
Right. So whatever you do, and this counts for the code, the sprites, the map, the sounds, and the music, they're all saved together in one file. And that's a plain text file, which is kind of cool. So even the music and the audio is encoded in plain text, which means you can diff it in source control and all kinds of stuff. But the first time, if you haven't established a name, you just hit escape to go back to the operating system and save some file name. And then now it'll say, okay, I saved that file. And that is now a file on your computer in your folder, which you can, again.
Yeah, and then just a reminder for anyone, you press escape to toggle back to the command line.
Yep, escape goes in and out of the editor. And now when I hit Control S, it says saved test 01. So once I've established that's the file name, I can do that. And technically I can then say save test 02. And now I've saved it in two different names. And then this one, I add some code. I'm going to hit save. And now I can say load test 01, and I'm back to the old project. Or load test 02, and I'm back to the project with this. So it's very easy to load and save projects. And again, since they're just tiny little text files, it's easy to drag them, tweet them, drag them, send them to people, copy paste them, merge and diff them, or back them up, or whatever you want to do.
That's awesome. It's really simple.
Anything else? Yeah.
Is there any transparency in the Sprite Editor?
No, there is no transparency at all in the engine. Now, there's no translucency. There is transparency, which we'll see in a minute. Black is by default the transparent color, but you can choose which colors are acting as transparent masks, but there's no alpha blending, there's no translucency.
Oh, okay.
Where is this saved Untitled stored?
So if you type folder on your computer, and you won't see it because I'm not sharing that window, but it will open in Windows the physical location of those files.
Okay. Here it is in app data. Okay.
And yeah, in app data roaming. And notice all the file names are lowercase. Do not use uppercase in Pico 8 ever. Even though it looks like I'm doing all uppercase here when I'm typing, I'm actually not doing uppercase at all. That's just what the font looks like. If you try typing with a shift key, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, you'll notice there are W, X, Y, Z. There are a whole bunch of funny shapes that you get, and these are part of the Pico 8 font set, if you will. So
Wingdings.
Wingdings, essentially. So you can say print hello and get a hello, or you can just say print I have 50, shift H is the heart, and it will print that. So there are some extended characters that are kind of nice, and those are actually going to be important. We'll see in a minute, even in the programming scheme. But in general, you're not using uppercase because uppercase is these weird wingdings. Everyone okay?
I think so. Yeah, there's been a few questions that we've gotten over text, but I think
Go for it.
Everyone's been kind of trying to help people solve problems too. So I think we've been able to address all of them as we've
Okay.
gone along. So we should be good to go.
All right. So I think the first thing I want to show for reals is the code. And it uses a very simplified version of the Lua scripting language. So if you've never used Lua, it's really, really simple. It's easy to hurt yourself in some bad ways, but for the most part, it's one of the most beautiful, simple, delightful scripting languages. And again, like I said, I'm a C++ expert, and I know Lua better than C++. It's that simple. So it's really easy to do things really fast. But just to give a quick example of some Lua, and then we'll actually just make some stuff and start making a game. I can say things like print hello. And now that I have my print hello, if I want to run my program, I can save it. And then if I go back out to hit escape to go back to the operating system, I can just type run. And then it runs my program. And much easier than that is you can just hit Control R to run the program. You can do that as much as you like. So escape, coming in and out, Control R runs the program, and you can run even from within the editor. So I can now do some other stuff. And with prints, I can also specify the position and the color, and there's a manual. You can see what are all the arguments for stuff. So I'm going to print in the upper left corner, which is 1,1, or 00 is the actual upper left corner. And I'm going to print in color 9 the phrase what's up. And if I forgot what color 9 is, I can go to the Sprite Editor and hover over here and see, aha, that's orange. So now if I click Control R to run it, it printed what's up at the top, and then it left the cursor up there. So it's not really meant to do this. It's really meant to be more of a game where we're doing something every frame. So let's actually try doing that instead. And I think as far as Lua, the scripting language itself, it's mostly intuitive. If you just kind of try something, oftentimes it'll work. But at least from today, you'll get some example syntax if you want to know some specific things, right? So let's start off with functions. And there are 3 functions that Pico8 expects us to have if we're making a game. And those are init, update, and draw, or rather underscore init, underscore update, and underscore draw. And anyone who's used, I would say not all, but many game engines is probably familiar with those concepts. This is code that's run once at the beginning. So it's for you to like define some monsters or something. And then if we say we're running at 30 frames per second, which is the default for Pico8, we're going to do 30 times a second, update, and then draw, update, and then draw. And that'll just keep repeating over and over. So update and draw together are a frame. This is also sometimes called a tick, right, in some game engines. So let's do a quick example. And to make sure that you've typed things right, you'll notice there are no like curly braces or anything like that. You just say function, and then it goes until you say end. Also, you can say comments with // but you can also use -- as a comment, which is why my line of dashes reads as a comment line. So either of those is a valid way to comment. There's bracket, like block comments, but I forget what they are. I don't really use them. All right, so let's try something basic. And let's try drawing something. So under the draw function, we're going to draw a filled circle. So we're going to use the circfill function. And again, we can look up in the manual, which is pico8.txt, but I'll just tell you what the arguments are. If you were to guess, you'd probably guess right. So I'm going to say the center of the circle is at 32,32. And it has a radius, maybe of 5, and then it has a color, and I'll use orange again. So the arguments are X, Y, radius, and color. And you can probably figure that out even without the manual just by trying some stuff. So if I hit Control R, it runs, and there's my little 5 radius circle at 32, 32. I have all this other junk on the screen though, and as with most game engines, generally the best thing to do is clear the screen at the top of every draw. So the first thing you do in draw is going to be clear the screen, and then you draw everything fresh on top of that clean screen every frame. So you can clear screen with CLS, and then you can specify the color you want. So if I specify 7, it'll clear the screen to white, but maybe I'll specify 0 for black, something like that.
And then double tap escape is the easiest way to get out of once you're running it. Right?
Right. Escape quits out, and then escape again comes back to the editor. Exactly right. Yep. And when you're running, you can also hit enter, and there are some other options. You can reset the game and start it over again, or you can hit enter again to just continue running. You can favorite this game, and there are going to be other things, and we can actually add things to this pause menu in Pico8 itself, which is pretty cool. So let's make this thing move around, and then we're going to change it into a sprite. We're going to make a map with tiles. We're going to walk around the map. There will be walls. We're going to make a simple adventure game where there are open doors and closed doors, and we can step on trigger plates to open and close them. There could be some fire that's burning, and if we step in the fire, we get burned, and maybe a monster that's wandering around, something like that. So to start with, let's say that there are just some variables, and I'm just going to say X is 64 and Y is 64. And in Lua and in Pico, you just say X equals 64, and now that's a permanent global variable. And there's an X now permanently everywhere. And that's fine. We may want to give it a little better name than that later, but for now, let's just try that. So instead of 32, 32, I'm going to draw the circle at X, Y. And the screen itself is 128 by 128 wide with 0, 0 in the top left, 127 in the bottom right. So if I run it now, it's at 64, 64, which is the center of the screen. And lastly, I want to start moving this circle around. So I'm going to say if we're holding down a button, and btn is the function that says if this button is being held down. And then the way you reference the buttons, there are 6 buttons on the Pico8 controller. It's like an old NES gamepad. So there's an up, down, left, right. Those are U, D, L, and R with shift held. Those are the little up, down, left, and right arrows. And that's how I reference them. And then there's also the X and the O buttons. So it's like an A and a B on a Nintendo controller. So I'm going to say Shift R. So if BTN and then Shift R, and that basically returns true if the right arrow is being held, or false if it's not. Then, and I always in Lua type my end before I go and type the stuff in the middle, just so I don't get confused and create something that's hard to debug later. So if you're holding the right button, and remember update is called 30 times a second, it's update then draw. Update is where we want to move things, change things, damage things, and draw is just for drawing. And that'll be important later. So in this case, I'm going to say X plus equals 1, meaning every frame while I'm holding the right arrow, X will continue to increase 1 every frame. So now when I run it, while I'm holding the key, it will move to the right. And when I let up, it stops moving. And then I can do that if I wanted to for the other 3 buttons. So I'm going to copy paste Shift L for left, and left would be X minus. I'm going to do Shift D for down. And since Y starts at the top and goes 0, 0 at the top and goes positive downward, we would go Y plus 1 when we're going down. And then Shift U is for up, and that would be Y minus 1. So if I have those 4, I should be able to move this thing around freely. If I'm holding left and right at the same time, then they'll both apply, which means they'll cancel each other. And it pretty much does what I would want it to do. Now, I said this is 30 frames a second, and that's perfectly fine. If you, Pico8 secret, if you call this update 60 instead, then you can get it to run at 60 hertz, at 60 frames a second instead of 30. I almost always do this. So now I'm going to get a smoother, but also faster moving object. And I'm not sure how good that looks on the Discord stream, but it's perfectly smooth on my end.
And then for the update, do you do draw 60 there, or does it always render at 30 frames per second?
Right. This determines the frame rate for everything. So it's going to be now update and draw at 60 hertz, both. It's always going to be one update, one draw. So there is no draw 60, but it will automatically draw after every update. So it's drawing twice as fast also.
Gotcha.
All right. Anyone have any questions on that so far?
I think I'm following along so far, just to make sure I got them all. So it's up, down, left, right with the shift for the icons, and then X and Y, or X and what was the second button?
And O. So we can do that right now. I'll say if Shift O is one of the buttons, or Shift X is the other button. And so I said BTN is for if you're holding down that key. There's also BTNP, which is just for striking that key. So let's just do a quick test with the X key. And we'll use it to play a sound effect. So I'm going to say SFX 0. And so this will say if I strike the X key, which is actually the X key on your keyboard, is what it maps to, then it's going to play sound effect 0. And it'll play it once each time I strike it. If I said BTN, then it's going to play it every frame as long as I'm holding it, which would probably be a little too much for the sound. So BTNP, whenever that's pressed, we're going to play this sound effect. And I'm going to make a more interesting one. There, that's my sound effect 0, which is this number here. And so now when I run, hopefully when I press X, it's going to play that sound effect. So SFX plays sound effect number 0 or whatever you say.
We had a question from Jacob. They said that they are still getting some of their print text, even though they've updated and saved their code without it. Is there anything that might be leading to that?
So if you make sure that you are clearing the screen every draw, you always want a clean screen at the start of every draw. I also like to clear the screen once at the very start of the whole program. I actually do it even above init. And this is so that if you have errors or something else, it will actually show them on a clean screen. So that's something I will typically do in Pico8.
It looks like, just for anyone else that might also be running into this issue, it looks like what Jacob was running into is going to be the symbols on the adding and subtracting values from X and Y. So plus equal to will add the value on the right-hand side on top of what the value is already equal to. So it'll be plus equals or minus equals.
Right. This should have been X equals X plus 1. That's what we're doing. It's just there's a shorthand in most languages, including this, that we can express that more simply as increase by 1 plus equals. But that's what that means. Yep.
Seems like we are on that. Everyone's doing a great job in the text, just helping other people out with any bumps that they're running into. It's fantastic. Good job, everyone.
Awesome. So we know how to check if a button is being held down, BTN. We know how to check if a button was just pressed, and that's what we would use for, attacking, swinging a sword, shooting an arrow. BTN is for sustained things like thrusting a ship or walking your character. SFX plays a sound effect, and you know that you're using a reserved, like a special built-in function if it turns green like that. So I'm not sure, how do I play music? Is it MUS? No, that didn't turn green. Music. Oh, yep, that turned green. So that must be the function to play music. And I'm going to go to my music. This is pattern 0 here. And so I'm going to try to play that music pattern 0 when I press the O button, but that's actually on the keyboard mapped to the Z key, the Z key. So your actual controls on this virtual joystick are, gamepad, are the arrow keys, and then Z and X are the two, the O and X buttons, or C and V also work. And actually, I want to talk to Russell to see, I think we can remap the keys, so I think this would work fine on the arcade cabinet as well.
Oh, I would love that.
Yeah, we can make that happen.
Okay.
As someone with a weird keyboard layout, I would love to learn how to do that, but later.
Since everything is just keyboard based, it should be totally compatible with that, since the cabinet just expects keystrokes. So, so now if I run this and press the O key on the controller, which is actually the Z key on my keyboard, it should play the music as well. There you go. So there are a lot more controls we can have with all these things. For example, you can set the volume for sound effects. You can have fade in and fade out for the music. So we're really just giving sort of the tier 1 of dip our foot into all of these. I think the next most interesting thing is the sprites themselves. So let's get into that. So if you go into the Sprite Editor, and you can pick any sprite number you want. You can see these are sprites 0 through 63. Don't mess with sprite 0. That's reserved as like a nothing sprite in the map. So use anything else you want. And you can go through, there are 4 pages of sprites. So if I go to page 1, these are now sprites 64 through 127. You can see pages 2 and 3 are pink. That's because they actually share memory with the bottom half of the map. So it's a little bit funny. For beginners, my advice is only use pages 0 and 1 for your sprites at first, and only use the top half of the map editor at first. Because later you'll have to decide either you're using that extra memory for the bottom half of the map to make it bigger, or you're going to use it for another 2 pages worth of sprites. So I'm going to make a simple player sprite, and it'll be sort of just a person, like that. And this is sprite 32, I can see, right? As I'm moving around, it shows the sprite number. And so I want to try drawing that manually. So instead of drawing a circle, I'm going to draw this wherever my player is, sprite 32. So I'm going to go back into my code, and instead of circle fill, which I'm going to get rid of, I'm going to say SPR. And SPR is how you draw a sprite. You say which sprite number you want. I'm going to double check. Yep, that's sprite 32. And then the location on the screen. So I'll say he's going to be at 64, 64 in the center of the screen. And there he is. And of course, I probably want him to be at X, Y.
You're using integers for everything? Is that, do these arguments all need to be integers?
Yeah, so in Lua, there's no difference between integers and floats. Everything is sort of a fixed point number. So you can have 3 or 3.6. For most functions, like sprite, it expects an integer. For color, it expects an integer.
What happens
Uh,
if you don't?
I don't know. I would say don't do it. My
All right,
guess
cool.
is that it just truncates it. Is
Yeah,
my guess.
it just drops it.
Yeah.
You can,
And that can be useful if you want to have it like oscillating back and forth and snap to the nearest, animation frame or something like that. But usually we want to use integers, where we would expect them. We'll give an example of some funny business with that with random here in a minute. But mostly if it expects an integer, it will just look at the integer part and ignore the fraction. So I'm drawing sprite number 32 at the coordinates x, y. So now in theory, I should be moving this person around and that should be great. And if I want to draw that same sprite multiple times, right, I can draw him 10 to the right of me. So I'll draw him at my position and 10 to the right. It's very easy to do. And since in draw, we're always going to clear the screen and then we draw whatever we want on top of a fresh screen every frame, we're going to draw whatever stuff we want and we'll draw them in the order that we specify so that this last thing we draw paints over on top of the previous thing. So it's the painter's algorithm, if you will. So this is sprite 1 for this stone wall, and I could print that. In fact, if I do that, it'll draw my player, and then it will draw the wall on top of him. So that I'll just see the wall because the player is being covered up by it. But if I change the order of those, then it'll draw the wall and then the player on top of the wall. So the order, of course, matters. Now, there's a much better way of drawing walls than just saying this a million times. In fact, I guess it would be the one, but there is a really cool function also just called map. And map, it has some arguments, but we don't need to specify them. That just says draw the whole map. And so what's in my map? I don't know, some stuff I was drawing. Let's put some other stuff and some other stuff. Those are ducks, I guess. And those are like haunted trees. So if I now say map, then it will draw the entire map and it will draw my player. Of course, the map is drawn on top of the player because I drew it after the player. So if I want the player to be on top, once again, I would put the map first. And now the player is going to draw over top the map. So whatever I put in the map, meaning whatever tiles I make and sprites I make, let's actually make something a little more reasonable. I'm going to give, let's say, some ground with some scattered highlights, something like that. So now in my map editor, those sprites all updated. I'm going to control left click to replace everything I see of one type with another type. And now if I just control R to run it, that's the map that I'm seeing. So it's pretty fast to iterate on the sprites, the map, and the code. All right, any questions on those things before we really start making the rest of the game?
I think Landon was running into some problems with drawing their character. I
Okay.
don't know if you had maybe some recommendations on things they could look for.
Make sure when you draw, make sure you're doing clear screen and then draw the character. And make sure that the character is actually sprite 32. If you made your character over here, that would be sprite 20. So whatever slot you put your character in, make sure that's the one you're passing for the first argument of sprite with X and Y to come after. So this is the sprite number. And so if I put in slot 20, let's say I make a green guy, if I'm drawing slot 20 for my sprite, then that will be the green guy instead of the orange guy. And if I get this wrong, it will just be nothing. It's so one of the first things you can see is that this black in the sprite is not in fact black, it is transparent. In other words, when I'm drawing this, you can see it's not drawing black on top of the background. It's just drawing the green and it's omitting the black pixels. That's because black by default is set as the transparent color, but there are functions we can call in Pico 8 to change what's transparent. For example, I can say pal t and say that color 0 is not transparent. And I don't want to go into all the details, but if you want to be able to do it other than translucency, there's probably a way to do it in Pico 8. All right, so since we're running low on time, I want to sort of jump right into a little more of an example of how I might actually make a game. And I think I'm going to just go in kind of turbo mode. So if you can keep up, that's great. But I want to just give people a little more sense of a couple other features that I think are really important to know about. So for one, you can create data structures. And the way you do that is by using curly brackets, like the left and the right curly bracket. And then once you've done that, you can say player.x and player.y. And so now we can just create variables inside of a data structure like player. So everywhere where I'm using x, I now need to say player.x. Let's go back to this. Player.y and here. So now I haven't done anything other than I grouped the x and y variables under this structure that has multiple different things in it. If I want to, I could say player.sprite is equal to 32. And now I can know which sprite my player is going to be using. And I could make a function that can draw not just my player, but maybe other monsters too. So I'm going to make another function. And one of the things I like to do is you can create this plus up here to create other tabs. And I'm going to just call this actors. So anything related to actors, I'm going to put additional code in here. You can have a number of tabs, and it doesn't really matter how they're organized. It'll see all the code everywhere. And for reasons I'll show at the very end, it's customary to put the first two lines of your 0th tab to be the name of your game and the author. One of the reasons for that is when we're playing, I can actually, for example, use Control-7 and it said captured label image. And when I'm done, I can say save. And I can also say save test02.png. And I can actually save an image, which if I do that, will actually create a little like cartridge. And it has this image on it and it has my name. And I'm not sharing that right now, so you can't see it. But if I go into the folder, there is a PNG on disk. And not only is it just a picture of my game, but all of my code, all of my sounds, all of my music is all secretly encoded within the PNG. So you can actually trade your games as cartridges, which are the picture of the cartridge. And encoded in the low bits of the color are all the code for the entire game.
What?
Yeah, yes.
Coded in the color?
Yes, they if you look each bit of colors in RGB, if it's 8 bits per color, the highest bit determines half of the color. And the second highest bit determines 25%. So by the time you're down 4 bits, you've already got like 95% of the color. So they just hijack the low bits. Essentially, they zip up all your code and then encode it into the low bits of the color. And so if you actually do this, you can zoom way in on your PNG and see that there's slight color variations, and that's all the code encoded into the picture itself.
Is there a size limit on that?
32K. And you can see in the bottom, I'm limited that I can only have 8,000 tokens. A token is like a word, like player is a token. And if I click on this, I'm only allowed 65,000 characters. And if I click on this, I'm only allowed a maximum compressed size. And that's when the zip is at 100%, it's too big, or 101%, it's too big to fit into the PNG.
So they're doing some data packing with your Lua code?
Yes, they literally zip it, and then the bits
more than zipping it, they must be like identifying.
Well, it uses Huffman encoding, so this whole word player will be, if that's a common word, it will compressed to just a few bits. So it's very effective. Okay, so let me try to make some functions and get a sense of like really making a game here. So I'm going to make a function called draw actor, and I'm going to pass in some actor. And this could be my player, or it could be a monster or something else. And so the way I want to draw the actor is by drawing its sprite on the screen. And I forgot how to do that, so I'm going to go back to the main and say, aha, yes, that's how I was doing it. So I'm going to cut that and say, that's how I draw an actor. But instead of 20, it's going to be a.sprite. In other words, the actor will have an X and a Y for its position. And it's also going to have a .sprite, which is what sprite that actor uses. So now I'm passing in the whole structure of a player, and it's going to expect there's this .sprite, a .x, and a .y. And that's exactly what I have on player, a .x, .y, and a .sprite. So now if I want to draw the player, I might just say draw actor and then pass in this player structure itself. And if I did it right, nothing changed. But what's nice about this is if I want to make something other than a player, for example, a monster, I can say monster.x is 80, monster.y is 90, and then monster.sprite is 20. 20 was the green guy I had. Here, I'll give him some mean red eyes. And so now if I want to draw the monster as well, I can simply say draw actor monster. And if I had an array of monsters, I could just for loop through them and call draw actor on each of them. So if there's 45 monsters, it would just draw them. So now when I run it, I see there's me and there's the monster. The monster's drawn on top of me because he was drawn second. So now I want to change it so that we're going to do turn-based, tile-based movement. This is going to be more of like a kind of roguelike maze puzzle game thing. So instead of having it be real-time movement, I'm going to move just once each time I press the button. So I'm going to change this to BTNP. And so each time I press up, down, left, or right, I will move once only instead of holding it. Now I'm going to want to take bigger steps than that, but that's essentially what I want. If I hold it down, I will get a key repeat from Windows probably, but those are still individual key presses, really. All right, so if you're doing a free-form video game where things can move wherever, like we kind of started off with, then I think it's useful to have X and Y be the pixel location on the screen or in the world. But I want to be a tile-based game where I'm going to move a whole tile at a time. So I'm going to say these X and Ys are actually going to be what tile you're in. And I'll say the monster starts in tile 8-8 and the player starts in tile 1-1. And so when I press the right arrow, now it's going to move me to the right by a whole tile. Well, how is that any different, right? Right now I'm just here and I just started up in 1-1. So what I want to say is when I draw myself, I'm going to draw myself not at my XY because those are my tile positions, but I want to draw myself at 8 times those because each tile is 8 pixels. So if I'm at 3,2, those are my tile coordinates. That means I would draw at 24:16 on the screen. So now I'm going to move one tile at a time and I'm drawn in the correct position. That's going to be really useful and important because not just in the map editor for the purpose of drawing things, but actually Pico 8 does like to think in tiles. And I've done a lot of games where we don't use the tiles at all, but it has a lot of really nice functions for when you are using the tiles. So let's say we had a map like this and it has some solid walls and some open places. And I'm moving around and I want to make it so that the walls are solid so that I can't walk in them. Right now the mortar is the same color as the ground, so I'm going to change that. Let's make the mortar be something like this. Okay, so in order to do that, what I need to do is a couple things. First, I'm going to make a function that instead of just moving here, I'm going to make a function that says I want to try to move there. And then that function will check, is that wall solid? Is that tile solid? And if it is, don't allow me to move. And this is the one most important piece of game logic I want to show. And then I'll show one other thing, and then we'll call the main section of this. And we'll take a little break. And then I want to show a couple of things afterwards if anyone wants to stay. So, so I want to do solid walls, and let's see if we can do that. In order to do that, we want to be able to ask Pico8, hey, what's at this tile in the map editor? And remember, in the map editor, you can see the tile coordinates in the bottom left. So if I'm at tile 4, 4, I want to ask what's there. And the answer is sprite number 1 is there. If I ask about this tile, it should say sprite number 2 is there. And I should be able to have multiple different things. So the way I do that is by using the mget function. That's the map get. And you just say mget 3, 3, and it will tell you what sprite is at that location. So we're going to use that and a try move function to effectively implement basic tile physics in our game. So I can
Tyler,
reshare.
can you hear anyone?
Discord's on funky mode.
I can unshare and reshare. Will that
I
ruin
can
the
no,
recording?
I can hear you fine. I think
Okay.
it's just him.
I think it was me. My Discord crashed. But
Okay.
Apologies.
No, that's fine. So for the try move function, I want to say, okay, this actor wants to move to this new space, and I want to see what's there. So when you say local in Lua, that means I'm going to make a variable, but it's only temporary to this function. It's not a permanent global like our other variables, like player. So I'm going to say, what sprite is at this tile? I'm going to say mget xy. So mget is the way you ask Pico8, what sprite number is the tile at this tile position? And then I'm going to say, in fact, I'm not even going to do this. I'm going to write another function. I'm just going to say if is tile solid, then return, meaning I will not move if the tile is solid. What is that function? I don't know. I haven't written it yet. I'm just thinking about what I wish it would do. If it's not solid, then I'll say, okay, then the player will move its X and Y to that X and Y. So if it's solid, it won't. Otherwise, it will. So now I'm going to write that function is tile solid. And I'm just asking about a particular tile. And then that's where I'm going to use mget to ask, hey, I'm trying to move to 4, 4. Is that a tile sprite 1, which would be a wall, or is it sprite 2, which would be ground? And then I'm going to say, if tile sprite is equal to 1, then return true. Else return false. Now there are much more clever and elegant ways I can do this, having definitions for the different tile types and stuff. But for now, I'm just going to check if it's equal to tile 1 in that spot, then it's solid. And then if I try to move there, if it is solid, the move will fail. So now if I go back to the player code, and if I say if we are pressing the right key, instead of just moving, I'm going to say, let's try to move. And who am I moving? The player. Where am I moving to? Player.x plus 1, meaning 1 to the right of me, comma, player.y. So this would be x plus 1, comma, y would be the square 1 to the right of me. And then I'm going to see if I can get that to work for all of these. So moving to the left would be x minus 1. And moving down would be y plus 1, because remember, y is down. And then moving up would be y minus 1. So now when I move, if I try to move up or down into something that's solid, it will say, aha, nope, that's tile number 1. That's solid. It's not allowed. And if we want this guy to move as well, the enemy, we can make him move around randomly. And if he wanders into walls, we can make him not go in the walls. So he will use try move also. So let's make him move around. And then we'll do one other thing, and that will be our main tour through this. When I move as a player, I want to say only when I press a key are the monsters going to move. This is going to be a turn-based roguelike, so they'll move only when I move. So the first thing I want to do is say update player, meaning I'm going to make a new function where I'm going to hide all this stuff, because this is kind of annoying me that I have all that code in this top level function. So I'm going to go to my actors tab. I'm going to say function update player, and I pass in a player. I can call it whatever I want. And then I do this. And now within here, the player that I'm updating would just simply be known as P, which might be useful if I had 4 different players. The Pico8 supports up to 4 controllers, and you can actually control them with the keyboard or with the Xbox controllers. You can have up to 4 Xbox controllers. So now update player, it's doing the same stuff it was doing before. I'm just calling it, so I tidied up. I moved it out of the way. And I'm going to do something else here. I'm going to say local moved. And only if you actually pressed one of these keys am I going to say moved is equal to true. So it's false unless you actually did do one of these 4 moves. And then at the end, I'm going to say if moved is equal to true, then move monsters. What does move monsters do? I don't know. I haven't written it yet. Let's write it.
What happens if you call it before it's written? Does
Yeah,
it
good
just
question.
Crash or
Yep, it will. As soon as I move, it's going to call move monsters, and it will say attempt to call global move monsters a nil value. So that's like a null pointer
Yeah, it's null.
dereference. Effectively, you can call functions, and if those functions don't exist, then it's a problem. One thing that betrays about Lua is that you can actually rename functions and remap them effectively like function pointers or delegates or whatever. So you can actually say move monsters is defined to be this, and then later you say no, move monsters is defined to be something else. And it just has to be defined by the time you call it. So it's kind of interesting.
that sounds terrifying.
It's terrifying. It's much better just to do simple things. Lua lets you do a lot of clever things that I think end up just giving you rope to hang yourself. So I like to use it in a very simple way. So let's write move monsters. And this is going to move all the monsters. And I always write my end first, just so I don't forget it. Because if you forget your end, then it tries to match it with a different one and it gets confused. So I'm going to say if I had an array of monsters, I might for loop through them. We don't have really time to do that. So for now, I'm just going to say move monster. And I'm going to move that monster that I made before. But I could make multiple different ones. I could move monster and have a goblin, and then I could say move monster and have an orc or whatever. Oh, or have these be in an array, and I could move orc number 2 and orc number 3. So if you expect that a programming language should be able to do this, Lua can probably do it. So what does move monster do? Okay. That's going to just move one guy, and we're going to just make him move randomly. But this one is passing in a monster, so this is moving one particular monster. And so I'm going to say, give me a random number, 0, 1, 2, or 3. So I can say rand 3 or rand 4. That gives me a random number from 0 up to 3.99999. But it's a floating point number. And so I want to round that down. So I'll either get 0, 1, 2, or 3 just as integers. So I'm going to use FLR, which is floor, which is how they round down. So I'm going to say local direction is equal to this, or I'm going to shorten it just because Pico's editor is so tiny. And so I now have a random number 0, 1, 2, or 3. And then I'm going to say if direction equals 0, then do some stuff. Else if direction equals 1, then do some stuff. Else if direction equals 2, then do some stuff. And then else we're going to do some stuff. And so I now have 4 things I'm going to do. This would be try to move him to the east, let's say. So this will be his x plus 1 and his y. And I'm going to make this for all of them. And so let's say number 1 would be him moving to the west. And then choice number 2 is moving down. And choice number 3 is him moving up. And because I'm using try move, he will try to move. But if it's solid, he will fail to move. And so now every time I move, he wanders around, but he will never, ever, ever go into the wall. We could easily do some other things. The very last thing I want to show is we're going to have some puzzle elements. And so I want there to be, let's say, blue and red doors. And this sounds complicated, but I'll be able to do it very easily now with the tools we already know. And we'll say blue doors are open and red doors are closed. And you can step on pressure plates to reverse that so that the blues are closed and the reds are open. All right, let's see how fast I can do this. So first I'm going to make those sprites for those things. So I'm going to make a blue door open, a blue door closed, and a blue door switch, and a red door open, a red door closed, and a red switch. So for the blue, let's have like a rim, and it's like it's blocking. Whoops. Let's make it look something like that. And then I'm going to copy and paste that over here and just substitute red and yellow for those colors. And then for this one, I'm going to say it's like the same thing, but it's like the door is kind of lowered. And then I'll copy and paste that over here and once again replace the colors. And then I'll have a little pressure plate, which is like a thing I can step on to trigger the blue doors to open them. And maybe I'll do that like something like that. And then I'll just do the same thing over here, paste it and replace with red. Maybe the yellow looks better. So now I want to place a couple of those in the map. So I'm going to say there are some closed blue doors here and here. And then I'll say that the red doors are going to start open. And I just, as a level design conceit, I'm just going to say the red doors are starting open and the blues are starting closed. And then I'm going to have this tile, when I step on it, opens the blue doors and closes the reds. And this one will do the opposite. So that's what I want to do. So effectively, I want to say whenever I step onto a tile, if it's the player that's stepping onto it, I want to see, is that tile, does it do anything special? And in this case, if it's one of these 8 or 12, it does something special. What does that do? It's going to replace all of these in the map with these, and all of these in the map with these. So let's see if we can write that real fast. So I want to first say when I'm moving the player, update player, and I see if I've moved. So I'll say if I've moved, then move the monsters, but I'm also going to say activate tile, something like that. And I've just moved onto this tile PXPY. So now I'll just say activate that tile. Again, what does activate tile do? I don't know. I haven't written it yet. Let's write it. And I want to say, okay, what tile is there, first of all? So I'll say the tile sprite is mget. Remember, that's how we ask what's at that position. And then I'm just going to do this in a simple way with just some if else's, and I'm going to hard code it with those sprite numbers. We can, again, do a more elegant way. So I'm first going to check if it's tile 8 that we just stepped on. Otherwise, if it's tile 12 that we stepped on, and we'll do something there. So what happens if we step on tile 8? Tile 8 is this one. If I step on tile 8, then I want to open all the blue doors. So I want to change all tiles of type 6 to tiles of type 7 in the map. So I'm going to say change tiles of type 6 to now be of type 7. What is change tiles? It didn't light up green, so it's not a Pico thing. It's a squirrel thing. I haven't written it yet. But I'm using this top-down programming style because I'm just calling functions I wish existed, and then I write those functions and I grant my wishes. So if I step on 12, then I want to turn this tile 10s into tile 11s. And I want to reverse the other doors as well. So if I step on the yellow trigger, then I want to turn all the open blue doors back to closed blue doors. And if I step on the blue trigger, I want to turn all the open reds back to closed reds. All right, great. So I run over this, and when I step on one of these things, error, I haven't written change tiles. You're right, I need to do that. So let's do that. It will be very simple. Whoops. And I'm changing from one tile type to another tile type. And here I'm just going to for loop through all the tiles in the map, or at least the top half of the map. So this is how you do a for loop in Lua. I'm just going to say for x equals 0, 127 do. And that's how you write a for loop, a basic one. And then within that, I'm going to say for y equals 0 to 31 do. So now I'm for looping through all the tiles in the entire map. And I'm going to say get the tile sprite at that location. And I'll say if that sprite is the one I'm changing from, then I can say mset, and this is the last function for today, is to change a tile in the map. So the map can be dynamic, and I'm going to change that tile to be the 2 type. So now when I walk around, when I hit that, all of those doors closed and the other ones opened. And when I hit this one, they reversed. Now the last thing is that they're not actually solid. So we have to go back to our solid function. We need to make sure that not just tile 1, but tiles 6 and 10 also count as solid. So I need to go find that is tile solid. And I'll say if it's 1 or tile sprite is 10 or tile sprite is equal to, I already forgot, 10 or 6, then it's going to be considered solid. So now that is solid. I can't move through it. Now these are solid and I can't move through them, and neither can he, because we're all using the same function. All right, I think that's pretty good for time. So I have some more stuff I could show, but I think that gives everyone a pretty good sense of
Awesome.
what does Pico8 do? What are the kinds of stuff you can use? And one of the things I didn't do was make good use of sounds, but as we saw, they're so easy to use and hear. It would be very easy for me to say, whenever the player tries to move, if it fails, play a zzz sound, and if it succeeds, make a little click sound for walking. So I think that's everything that I'm going to show for now.
Well, thank you so much, Squirrel. I do want to say, as just some like follow-up questions, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah.
I asked if anyone wanted to ask about this. I got a couple myself. One is just I wanted to ask a little bit about kind of feature set that I'm curious about outside of the scope of this conversation, and kind of imagine what I could maybe make in Pico 8.
Yes.
Basic one, just is there any way to do save states in Pico 8?
Yes, you have a virtual like save memory you can write to and read from, and it's actually can be shared across games. So you can actually have multiple cartridges that are sharing data with each other. So you can actually switch from one game to another. If the games start getting really big, you can have a game for your dungeon and then have a different game for your village.
These insert cart too.
Yes, exactly right.
Could you at runtime tell it to load a second cartridge?
Yes. Well, you can switch to a different cartridge. But you can
so
have
you could say,
cartridges
like,
can launch each other with arguments and stuff. So it's very cool.
Wow. That's cool.
If you go into Explore, one of the things in the search is I'll search for a game I made. This is called Mirror's Edge. It was for the Pico 8 community has a advent calendar every sort of winter holiday where we have a different game that's released every day.
Oh, cool.
And this was last year. It's a parkour game trying to race to the nativity scene. So it's Mirror's Edge. You're the wise man bringing the myrrh. This is a good example of some of the kind of stuff you can do. So we can have little interstitials. We've got characters with physics and animation. We can bounce on things, have different AI that are moving around, like the guards. They can hit me and shove me. And it's really, really easy to do all this stuff. If I say exit to
going on here.
Explore, I can actually now I'm like, oh, that's a cool game. I want to see how it works. So you can just look at the code, because any game in Pico 8 comes with its own stuff. Now, Pico 8, there are some palette swap hacks you can do. So we actually hacked the palette. So this is where the map actually should look properly. But we had it set up so that it will scan the map when you start. And so if you have, where's the starting point? So for example, anytime where it sees this guard sprite, it automatically spawns a guard entity. So if I go like this and run, there are now going to be many guards in that place.
That's good.
Wow.
That's really good.
That's really good.
I had a probably pretty advanced question.
Mm-hmm.
I know you can load other carts. Where does that? Do the carts get unloaded from memory as soon as you do that? Because I know that Pico 8 has a lot of functions for accessing the memory directly.
Right. So quite nicely in that manual where it says, here's how to draw a sprite, at the bottom it says the exact byte for byte layout of the memory. You can peek and poke and manipulate that memory manually. But essentially, if you're switching from one cart to another is kind of a hard, like a cold restart. So the only thing you can do is save to the persistent save data, which is like you save it under a name, and you can just have like 32 numbers you can save. It's not much. And then you can just say reboot, or like reboot with a different game. And then you can give, I think, some basic arguments that are passed to that game. So the carts are meant to be almost a total clean separation, and that memory would get totally reset. But there are ways to like load that memory, save that memory to disk, load it from disk. So you can even write things like image importers and all kinds of weird stuff.
Oh, wow.
Cool.
It does expose as much as it possibly can to you. So you can get pretty, nerdy about it.
I was definitely looking for ways to fit more graphics. Let's have a graphics cart and just load it into memory somewhere, but no.
Yeah, absolutely. People do that. They'll have like for level 2, they'll just run a different cart, which so they have a whole new set of sprites and stuff.
Oh, wow.
So yeah. You will, if you make a big, like this game here, I think if we go look in the text editor, I'm at normally I was at 99% compressed size for most of the game. And then I did a really aggressive thing. But you will definitely run up against the limits.
Jacob asked earlier how you might go about doing something like dialogue, but funny enough, at the start of this cart, it just showed dialogue. So it was like, oh, just go find this cart, check that out.
Right, and at the end of this, for example, we have. Let's see if I can get.
I like little sheepies.
Oh, there's my 5 guards there. If I want, I
Shot
can
yourself
just
with the foot there.
here. I'll just take this guy, and instead, I'll put him right at the end.
Oh, you cheater.
When you get to the nativity scene at the end, oops, I've got multiple players in there now. Then you finally arrive, and then the wise men all make cracks at you, or Jesus or Mary or Joseph all make like ribs at you, and they so like it's very, very easy to do that stuff. Let me see, for example, in here, I think at the very top there are little quotes and little phrases, and so we just put strings into arrays, and then we just said these look in the snarky comments array, or whatever. So it's pretty easy to do, and you can, since you can say print hello, add a location in a color, then you can easily do that, print that 9 times, where you print it in black all around it, plus or minus, and then print the real one on top, so you can get a nice black outline, and you can do it with the characters unfolding one at a time. So you can have some really, nice dialogue stuff, but you're going to be doing it all yourself, just with printing.
Are there any other similar to like the cart swapping or anything? Is there any other like kind of exciting, interesting little features about Pico8 that you might want to share?
Yeah, I mean, you can hack it to go to change the resolution, to go lower res. You can hack the palette. There are secret colors. There are ways you can even write code that is self-modifying. And so you can do a lot of really bizarre things. And Lua itself is extraordinarily powerful too, where you can have dictionaries and arrays and stuff, and arrays of dictionaries of structures, but you can also have every argument to every function is optional, and so you can pass in a thing. You're like, well, if they passed me an actor, I'll do this, but if they passed me this other thing, I'll do this instead. So it's very, very, very powerful. Other than the size limitations and the resolution, I don't feel constrained, like limited really at all of what I can do.
Yeah. It seems like it really is a really special kind of sweet spot between like having low level control over like creating your game, but also just like ease of entry for like graphics APIs and authoring assets and content and getting that imported into it.
Yes.
Just really beautiful sweet spot. Awesome.
And I like, one of the things I like best about it is, like we saw tonight, it's really easy to do simple things, but between Lua and Pico being written, by a game developer's game developer, someone who wanted a really nice little retro cozy feel. If you want to do something cool, there's probably a neat way to do it. So it is a deep rabbit hole. Is this the one?
How do you go from a downloaded PNG, put it in the right place, and then load it into the cartridge?
That's exactly what you do.
Okay.
You type folder, and then
you put it in your folder.
Drag and drop it in your folder, and then say load whatever.
Oh, so
load whatever. Okay.
So
okay.
usually it guesses the P8 extension, but it'll also. Do you have to explicitly say the PNG, or will it guess the PNG?
You have to say PNG if you want the PNG version.
Oh, okay.
But you can easily load the PNG and then save the P8, or load a P8 and save a PNG. They're interchangeable. It's the same data, it's just hidden in the image. Pico8 is always capturing a live animated GIF. And so if something cool happens in your game, you can hit, I forget what the key is, to be like, oh crap, that was awesome. Save out the last 30 seconds as a GIF. And then you have animated GIFs of gameplay. So it's really, really easy to make little like teasers for your game.
The basic key is F9.
F9. Yeah, and you can set that's 8 seconds by default, but you can set the limit, and because that's in the past, you can do it after something cool happened and you happen to notice it. So you could be trying to do something and then finally get it and then hit F9 after.
Oh, that is so amazing.
So there, I saved the image, and now I'm going to save Society of Play demo, and I'll just save that as a .p8, and then I'll also save it as a .png. And I'm going to go to my folder. And you can't see this, but I now have SOP demo. And you can see it's a little picture of a cartridge that says Adventure by Squirrel, Pico8 cartridge. But in that image, if you zoom into it in a paint program, is the data. It's not even in the secret segment of the PNG. It's in the color data.
Wow.
So what's cool about that is even if you paste this into a paint program and then paste that to someone else and save it as a TIFF or something, like it's all there. And hopefully everyone gets a sense that, we could easily make this 10 hours and there would be no end of things to show. But I think you have most of what you need to start.
Squirrel, thank you so much for doing this. We've been wanting to do a Pico8 workshop with you for years and years now. And just thank you for doing it.
And the developer who makes Pico8, I'll also add one last thing, is really, really, really sweet. Just a wonderful, the nicest guy ever. He also makes Voxatron, which is a 3D voxel version of this. And in fact, it's the same engine so that you can do almost the same stuff, but with 3D positions instead of 2D. And it's fabulous.
Voxatron is amazing. I adore that tool.
Same guy.
Just thank you again, Squirrel, and talk to everyone soon.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Squirrel.
Yeah, thank you, Squirrel.
Thank you.